What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Atheist Roundtable. And we have quite the episode planned for you tonight. Before we get started, I want to make sure I make the proper introductions. As always, I'm your host, Oz, and at the top of the screen here to my right might be your left. That is Jesus, Mike.
What's up there, everybody? How y'all doing? Good, man. Glad to be back. I'm glad to know I haven't been replaced. I turned on the thing last night, and for some reason, I was not involved in the show, and I don't know why, but we'll figure that out some other time. It's whatever. I'll just blame it on you.
I was about to say, just blame it on us. That's normal.
It was definitely not because of my own technical issues. That's for sure.
No, and damn technology is sometimes it's supposed to make things simpler. Sometimes it complicates things. But
then a lot of time it complicates things.
Yeah, we won't talk about the computer that quacks, right? Jesus, Mike.
The what that quacks. Let's move on to the important part of the conversation.
Yeah. That's what I thought. And then in the middle there, the one, the only Murder Shed Steve. How are you, my man?
Hey guys, I just woke up in the middle of the floor of the murder shed about 10 minutes ago, and I'm not really even sure what's going on, but I'm ready to discuss some beliefs.
There's something. Is that a person behind you, or what's going on back there?
Well, nothing to be concerned about.
Gotcha. Go.
Yeah.
See if I can catch your attention. So.
Yeah. No. Trust me, I know what's going on up in here.
And then for the first time with TART live on screen on our roundtable episode, Ben G. Atheist. Glad to have you, man.
What's up, everybody? I'm doing just fine. I had a big day of kayaking on my Sunday morning, just enjoying the nature and just kind of getting out there. So I might be a little bit red today, but it's good to be here.
No problem. And Ben and I have been talking the last couple of weeks, and he's joined us this evening, and we're excited. We got a little surprise for you tonight, and we're going to do things just a tad bit different than we normally do. And Ben, if you would just real quick, I know that you and I have had conversations about where you come from and where you're at now. But what is your stance? What is your worldview? That way everybody knows, and then we'll get into the meat of this show.
Sure. I guess if I had to briefly just outline my story, I was raised a United Methodist in the United Methodist Church in Alabama. I didn't have any kind of fundamentalist creationist views. I was very much God is love, and to live a good life was to be like Jesus. What happened as I got older and I became like a junior or a senior in college, I started questioning. I just started saying, this is really important. The God question is like the most important belief that you can have. So it's really important I get this right. And since there were so many denominations, I ended up studying as much as I could, or just listening to debates. And I realized the belief that I held was not based on the Bible whatsoever. And so as I learned more about the Bible or the claims within the Bible, I just said, look, for these reasons, I'm out. It kind of happened over and over again. Mm-hmm. And just all of the contradictions between the things that I knew about science, about how the world came to be, and the more fundamentalist views, all of that went out the window for me. And so I became a nihilist for a minute. I discovered atheism. I discovered humanism. I discovered skepticism. And that was about 8 or 9 years ago. And I've just continued thinking and having conversations since then.
Okay. No, perfect. So let's do this. Nobody watching and listening knows that we actually have a special guest coming in tonight to have a conversation. And we are going to introduce someone that's familiar with the TART platform, the TART channel, and has become a great friend of ours. And we have a different conversation than the last time ahead of us. But we want to introduce, again, the man, the myth, and the legend, Mark of Legend. What's
up, guys? How you doing?
Hey.
We would have given you some like WWE music, but copyright.
Yeah. We get taken down. We don't want that.
I don't even know if I'm allowed to say those 3 letters, to be fair.
Yeah.
I think I can play it on my recorder.
I might have one of those laying around. I could bring that up. Good to meet you, Mark.
Good to meet you too, man.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think Mark and Ben.
Ben, have you two been interested?
I know
have never
all the
personally-
hairs that are on your head, good sir.
So Ben had tons of great questions in the comment section last time Mark was
Yeah,
on.
I saw those.
And we'll get to that a little later. But other than the episode, that aside, Mark, since all of us talked last, how have you been, man? How you been feeling?
Very good. Today, I believe that I uncovered the reason for the prophecy of Jesus coming down on the horse with the sword in the mouth. I think I deciphered it. So maybe later on we can talk about that.
Okay,
I think you guys will enjoy it too, because it takes it away from the magical aspect of it and grounds it in some practicality.
Sure. Yeah, I would be interested to know how it goes from conjecture to fact.
Yeah. If time allows, we can definitely jump into that. But let's.
That was a highlight of my day. Like I got coffee and then I looked at scripture. That was my day today.
So strap in, boys and girls. We're in for another 3 hours.
Get your coffee, get your drinks. It's time to get it in. But no, for everybody, the comment section has been blown up really since about 30 or 40 minutes before we even started. So first thing I'm going to do before we get into the conversation is thank everybody that's in the comment section already, those that are viewing that aren't commenting. Thanks for hanging out with us at the Atheist Roundtable. We appreciate it. And let's get down to business. So one of the things that Mark wanted to talk about, and Mark, I know I've seen several of your TikTok videos talking about atheism and agnostic atheism. And I think we have a few people here on screen that share similar views on that. And we may even have a little bit of different views than each other on it. But I want to get down to that. So Mark, first, what is your issue with the tag or the label agnostic atheist?
So you guys correct me if I'm wrong, leading up to, I guess, what led me to start be a little critical of that agnostic atheism. We have theism, which is the belief in God, right? So then we have atheism, which is the disbelief in God, right? So that would be counter or anti to the belief in God, right? So if I were to ask an atheist, does God exist in the universe? They would say no. Am I correct?
No,
Not necessarily.
Yeah, I would say that there's a difference between the ontology of this, whether or not we're talking about this being. So either this being exists, you either agree with that or you don't. And you have the subset, which this is just philosophy 101, which is the knowledge with that, and you would use this with really any claim because the knowledge that you would have of the belief is important. It's a subset of that. So, for example, I could believe I'm a theist, but I might not know. I just might believe that to be true. I might be convinced for something, for some reason, right? But I might not actually know. I might tell somebody like I'm 50% sure, and I would be considered an agnostic theist at that point because in the knowledge sense, I'm saying I'm not sure, but in my belief, what I'm convinced of, I'm saying I'm a theist.
So if you would provide, a 1 or 2 sentence, very precise and articulate definition of what a theist is, what would that be?
Someone that believes
Someone
in God.
who believes that a God exists.
And then, so if you were to do the same with atheism, what would that sentence be?
Can I interject here?
Someone that believes a God someone that doesn't believe in a God. So a theist is someone that believes in a God.
Yeah.
An atheist is someone that doesn't believe in a God.
So,
which means that an atheist worldview is there is no God in the universe. So it's the anti to theist, right?
So
it's
Mark,
like the exact opposite.
Yeah, Ben.
Mark, I just looked up the prefix a, and it's you're trying to make the connection that atheism is the antithesis of theism, or that to be an atheist that you have to make the opposite claim. Atheist or a is literally not or without. So to say that I am not a theist, that's it. It's not a claim. And so you're trying to tie in I think the antithesis, or because I don't have the belief, I must believe the opposite. And that, I think, is the error.
Well, no, that's what I'm arguing is I don't think it's an error. I think it's a truth. And here's where I'll get at that.
Okay, I'd like to hear why.
So with agnostic atheism, there's a linchpin in agnostic atheism. And that is that the thing that agnostic atheism can't pin down is the pantheistic view, right? This idea that God and human beings and everything in the universe are intrinsically one. And then so in that case, we have a conceptual shift in the definition of God.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's not a matter of belief or knowing, because when I look at this cup, I say, well, there's God. It's right in front of you, because of this pantheistic conceptual shift from, the external Abrahamic God to a pantheistic one. And so the agnostic atheist can't actually hold their position against the pantheistic person because the definition changes completely. And so that's one issue. And I guess that's the issue I'm having with definitional terms, because from my perspective, so I'm not an Abrahamic believer, right? I'm an alchemical or hermetic believer. I would say pantheistic, but it goes there's a couple layers beyond it. So I wouldn't label myself a pantheistic. I'd say very close. But the alchemical God has those same principles. And so the agnostic atheist can't discuss the belief or knowing of God as there being an ability to switch between one or the other, because there's an intrinsic connection. And so I guess my question is, are you viewing all types of gods and all interpretations of God and then taking this either anti-position or a plus position, or the agnostic middle position of I don't know? Because I guess the issue becomes, I think there's this misconception with atheism and theism, atheism not being a position. I think
I can clear it up real quick, and then I'll pass it to Ben, because we were talking about this, and we would be talking about like more classical theism, and I would like to hear him and you kind of a discussion on this. But I'd like to ask you a quick question. If I say that I think X is false, and then I also say that I'm not convinced of X, are those the same statements?
No.
So,
but that's
right.
The thing is, the X is false.
Okay, hold on. But if I say
atheism,
hold on.
Well, one second. I just want to.
I know, but I just want to take it at the yes or no question, and then we can move on to the explanation. Well,
it's not just to prove. Yeah, but sometimes it's not as simple as yes.
I know, and you can explain it, but let me just at least get to the punchline. If we are both saying that I think X is false and I'm not convinced of X, are two different statements, and then I am saying I'm not convinced the God exists, right? I'm not a theist, so proposition P or not P, I have to be not P in this case in terms of the ontology. My epistemology is different in the sense that I might not know for sure. For some gods, I might be able to logically deduct that God likely doesn't exist, and therefore I don't think it exists. But if I'm saying X is false, I still don't believe in a God. But it's a more narrow definition of saying I've ruled out that God, as opposed to saying I'm not convinced the God exists. I still lack the belief in God. I still don't believe that God exists, but I'm not making a firm knowledge claim that God does not exist. I'm not trying to prove a universal negative. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but that would make you an agnostic.
Yes, I'd be an agnostic atheist.
Not an atheist.
Well, the last point I would make is that this is the same problem I kind of have with how you define God. And so you kind of have a problem with how we define atheist or agnostic, and some theists get pissed off about how someone defines faith. And I get that. I 100%. Mark, at the end of the day, if you wanted to say I'm an agnostic, I'm okay with that. I just don't care at this point. It used to bother me. I don't care. If that's the term that you think, that's fine. All I would want to convey is that I don't believe in God, but to make the point to you about God is that when we talk about God, you're not talking about the same thing that we're talking about. It's just the same thing as if I was talking about candy and someone's like, well, I'm sorry, I was talking about broccoli. And it's like, well, I'm not talking about the same thing as you. And it's not conducive for the conversation's sake, in my opinion.
Well, so here's my question. Is it that you don't believe in an external God?
I just don't believe in any definition of God because I don't see any reason to just believe it.
And
here's my follow-up question. Define the alchemical God for me.
The what?
The alchemical.
It doesn't matter what God. It could be a natural pantheistic God. It could be all these different types of
What
gods.
I mean
It
is,
wouldn't matter.
Well, I mean,
this is like the underdetermination principle in science. Like we could have all these rival theories. It doesn't matter until you're presented any justified reason or any evidence at all for me to care about one of the potential ad hoc, what I would view as ad hoc rationalizations. It's just imaginary to me, so it doesn't matter.
But if you don't know the alchemical God and you don't know the theory, how can you make a judgment on it?
I'm taking a null hypothesis and saying I don't believe that it exists. This is the point of what I'm making, saying that I think there's a difference between saying X is false and I'm not convinced of X. Either way, I'm an atheist under whatever definition of not believing that thing exists.
Well, so I guess, for instance, like the definition, like the dictionary definition of atheist is a person who disbelieves or lacks belief in the existence of gods or gods.
Yep.
Where that is like, to me, that's if God is +1, that's -1. So one person that would think God does exist, there's a layer of God in the universe. An atheist would say that layer isn't there.
So Mark, I kind of have a question in regards to what you were talking about before, where you're asking questions about the alchemic God, right?
Yeah.
So technically, if I'm going to be somebody who doesn't believe in something, right, like a God, and then you ask me to define an a God basically that I'm not familiar with. I don't have a definition of it because I don't know. I don't know anything about it. And if I don't know anything about something, then how can I believe in it?
Yeah, and I'm not asking you to. What I mean is,
so let me ask a question of you. Can you define what you mean by alchemic God and what that is, so that I can decide whether or not I believe it?
Well, that's what I did for those 3 hours, the last podcast, is explain the alchemical God. So it would be based on all those things I explained before. You go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I feel like I have an understanding of it in that case, because I felt like I was following what you were saying during our last conversation. I was smelling what you were cooking, and it really breaks down to definitions between you and me. Then just using certain terminology, I think it makes things more confusing, and that's really the only difference that you and I have. So,
and I guess I'll jump in here and say that to me, it's about what's kind of pragmatic, right? So when I think about my atheism, I walk around as an atheist. I'm convinced at this point that there's not a God that intervenes in my daily life or is my thought process or anything like that. So when I say I'm an atheist, I'm saying I don't think a God has an impact on my life. All right. And when I say I'm an agnostic, it's because I can't know that. There could be a God that's controlling the simulation behind it, but I don't act or modify my behaviors or thought processes based on a God belief. So I may be different in some ways than how everyone else is explaining it.
So when you say that you don't think a God has an impact, do you think, is there room to say that there could be an indifferent God that doesn't have an impact on you but still exists?
Now, yes, and I don't think there's a good reason to believe that that's the case.
So, I mean, but then we're adding that layer of intent, which now intent's another word.
No, there's no intent there.
Well, because you just said that you don't believe in a God that has an intentful impact on you, right? It's not the same as believing that God doesn't exist completely. The way you just worded it to me was, I don't think God has an impact on my life day to day, doesn't intervene.
Sorry, I can rephrase. I don't think there's a good reason to think that there is a God that does that. It has nothing to do with intent.
Well, so what I mean is God intervening in your life is God having intent. That's what I meant. So what you're saying is you don't believe in a God that intervenes, but that's not synonymous with you not believing a God exists.
If he doesn't intervene, then I don't care. Yeah,
what I mean is, though, that's not synonymous with you thinking God doesn't exist at all. Just believing that God doesn't intervene with your life isn't the same as believing that God doesn't exist at all.
So that's why we use the definition of atheism that we stick with, because it's not believing that God exists. It's not the antithesis of that.
Well, that still has nothing to do with whether or not he intervenes. That's a completely different conversation that neither atheism or agnostic define in what they mean as a word. God's intervention in your life is something completely different that has to do with a characteristic of God within a theistic conversation.
I think Jesus, Mike, did you have something that you were trying to?
No, I'm trying to be. I want you guys to have conversations. So I'm like fighting that. Like,
sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I think I made my point fairly clear, and my only question would be like, I'm not quite fully understanding your objection to what I'm saying. There's sometimes some words that you'll throw out there that I'm not familiar with, that I don't know how you're using those words, and so sometimes I get a little bit lost. As far as I know, my definitions of atheism and agnosticism, I can be an agnostic atheist to every God. I'm an agnostic atheist to, the creation or the fundamentalist Yeshua and things like that. When it comes to a pantheistic God, I'm way more in the agnostic position, and I don't act as if there is one. There's no reason to change my behavior, and I'm more pragmatic when it comes to deistic gods or things of that nature.
And you can add on to what I was going to say was just that the reason why the definition is useful for me and why I changed the definition, because when I consider myself an atheist, it was still under the same kind of pretense. Like, I'd never really considered atheist as like, I think all gods don't exist, but it's very useful for me to go, well, the Gnostic label helps me, because when someone goes Yahweh, and me and Ben did this before the show. Kind of, I was almost about to like shuffle out cards, be like, which one are you, a Gnostic atheist versus an agnostic atheist? Like Yahweh, Allah, kind of thing. And for me, if that was to be handed to me, you go Allah, I go Gnostic. You go Yahweh, Gnostic. Like I'm a Gnostic atheist when it comes to the Judeo-Christian God. I'm a Gnostic atheist when it comes to any version of the Abrahamic God. I'm not only not convinced. I think that the evidence actually goes the opposite way. The morality set goes the opposite way. The logical impossibilities of its existence go the opposite way. The idea of a triune God for the Christianity go the like all these things. I can go, you know what? That's enough for me to go, that God does not exist.
And Mark, you would agree with that, right?
It's useful. Sorry, Ben.
I know the audio is so weird. Mark would agree with that, right?
Well, so, and here really what we're doing right now is we're hitting the linchpin of why there was a mistranslation. So for instance, when a theist who is in the Abrahamic religion based on this, now, by the way, I think that the reason that people believe that God's an Abrahamic God is an external one that lives somewhere in the universe is because they're misinterpreting the scripture. But with that aside, there is no way to ever know that an Abrahamic God exists unless it comes down and communicates with us. And now that can happen in a variety of ways. Mm-hmm. It can come down in a spaceship and we can realize God is an alien, or it can manifest in this ethereal form and we realize that God exists outside of the visible light spectrum and is some kind of energetic part of our ecosystem we're not aware of at any given time, but that can enter in to our space, kind of like the way people say UFOs just appear out of nowhere. And so, like, we still need an empirical way of saying, well, if God, an external God, within local universe, who is sentient and who is individualized, there still needs to be like, well, is he an alien? Is he some kind of etheric or energetic being that lives outside of the five senses that can enter in as he pleases and has his superpower in the universe? If that's a real God, there's eventually, hopefully, going to be a way to prove that. But outside of it actually coming here, a theist can never know if the Abrahamic God exists until it can come down and we can literally measure it with whatever rational experimentation we have to be able to do so. But when you get into pantheism or
because now you just took away personal experience from them, which would give them the credence for them to justify them as, because it's necessarily first person revelation, they would be justified in that sense to grant that existence. My thing is that every explanation that's offered is purely ad hoc until you can demonstrate it. And this is the thing: the Christian God and those types of gods have offered themselves up to me to be falsified. Genesis, to me alone, Genesis, the account of creation, and my understanding of evolution, going and getting a Well, that's a fast car. Going to get a I'm majoring in computer programming, but I'm going to be minoring in biology. And if I end up going to this, transferring to the school that I do, I'm going to get a damn good education just in the minor for it. And for me, just even my understanding now is enough for me to go, that falsified that religion, that God. Unless you could just say, well, men got it wrong for some reason. And then at that point, it's like, I don't know what the fuck we're talking about.
Well, let me drop a bomb on.
But here's the main point. Here's the main point. The God that you defined to me, I would be an agnostic to it. But I don't feel like you've offered me any way to falsify it, which is the only reason I'd be agnostic. It's not like out of you did a good job and I think maybe it's possible. It's that I don't know how I would go. I'm not convinced that God exists because I feel like you've defined it very loosely, very arbitrarily, and very in a sense where it's like we might just be talking about the same thing, but I just don't agree with your definition of God the same way you don't probably agree with the way that I'm defining myself as an atheist.
Yeah, so I'll explain.
Hey, Mark, real quick before you answer, I just want to say I'm going to let Mark answer this, and then we're going to move to the next segment. That way we make sure for time purposes we fit everything in. Okay.
Would somebody mute Oz? I want to hear this bomb.
Oh, the bomb's coming right now.
So that interpretation in Genesis of Adam and Eve being two human beings who were brought here or whatever in the Garden of Eden, the reason it doesn't fall in line with evolution is because it was misinterpreted. You see, Adam comes from the word Adamu, which means all of like mankind, the human species. Eve comes from the word Chawa, which means life. The actual real translation from the Hebrew, from like the Torah, is Adam was tempted by life. The story of Genesis is one when human beings went from being like not mindless animals, but unconscious animals to consciousness. And so began to be able to consider past and future. And so that's the knowledge of good and evil. A gazelle drinks by the water, not worried if a lion's going to eat them unless the lion's chasing them. It doesn't consider the past or the future or consider the knowledge of good or evil of the lion. So that story is actually conceptual and metaphoric. And because we've been misinterpreting it so long, people say, oh, that's because God put two people here. No, it's been mistranslated. Adam means man, Eve means life. Eve wasn't a woman. Eve was a concept, life, existence. And that's why the gods say, look, they are like us now, because that meant we could think for ourselves and create and consider the past and the future. And so that's the mistake that's made in Genesis. And that's why it conflicts with the very logical theory.
Well, no. It doesn't conflict that for that reason. It conflicts because it makes no novel testable predictions. That's why it conflicts. It makes no novel testable predictions. That's why. So like the reason why I don't accept that, and the only reason I give it pushback is if it's metaphorical and it's all that, I don't care. I frankly just don't care about that because it's not useful at all.
Well, it's absolutely useful.
No, it's not. It's as useful as Spider-Man is for other people that take.
No, it's a dense, beautiful, philosophical and psychological understanding of human beings. That's beautiful. It's important.
Hey, cool. And we can wrap back around to that.
Okay.
I wanted Mark to answer, and if we get back to it, we will. But I want to make sure that we get into the next part because I have another surprise I'm going to introduce in a few minutes. But what I want to do is, so for those that don't know, Ben was referred to Pasta in the TART platform from the one and only Anthony Magnabosco, which for those that watch and listen, you know that we really look up to him and value his work and what he does. And we want him to be able to do, I'm talking about Ben, for Ben to be able to do what he does. So Ben, you had some great questions last time Mark was on just regarding his belief system. And for the record, guys, this is not a debate. This is just a conversation, in satirical, not satirical, Socratic.
I was like, we could get satirical.
That's not the hard part.
I said pasta, and I started thinking.
you give me my wrestling belt, we can get satirical quick, man.
Really, some SE, some street epistemology in there. But we want him to be able to do that. That's what he's passionate about and he loves, just like we do. But that being said, Ben, you had some great questions. Do you have one you want to start off with Mark?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify for anybody watching, pure, quote unquote, pure SE would not be involved with, you wouldn't have an audience watching or, insert any facts or you may not even know exactly what I believe or disbelieve. So I do want to start really kind of from the beginning, and that's Mark, the belief that I'd like to talk about is your God belief. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So we'll just go kind of real quick. One, do you believe in God? And then just so I know what characteristics of God. So like usually I can say like, okay, it's the Christian God. It's the God that's described in the Bible. Is there a characteristic of God that I can know, that just that way we know what we're not talking past each other.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. 1 second. Let me.
And it can be real quick, like if it is like Abrahamic God or pantheistic God, I'm all here for it for either one.
Okay. Cool. So real quick, I just wanted to say how much I love the show, how excited I am to see you guys grow every day. I think I said this to Pasta earlier. You guys should have 1 million subscribers, not the Kardashians. You guys are having important conversations that matter. And a lot of the stuff I do on TikTok and the critique and the back and forth, it's all love. I think you guys are doing something really, really amazing. And I'm so happy you guys exist. And I'm so happy you guys' show exists. So with my God, when Carl Jung was asked if he believes in God, he says, that's a hard question to ask. I know God exists. And okay. It feels arrogant. But then when you look through the more pantheistic alchemical understandings, it's like you said, I'm not an Abrahamic God believer. I think I've got my theories on what Yahweh is, right? But that's not the God. It might be a lower G God in whatever representation that actually makes back in history. I don't know what happened.
And for the purposes of this conversation or for this, the street epistemology, which is good. And I should ask, are you okay with using a street epistemology approach? Do you know much about it?
I don't know too much about it, but I did a little looking right before we started, but I'm comfortable with any type of analysis.
Cool. And I'll just kind of lay out what we're going to do here. Okay. We're going to identify a belief. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we're identifying, God exists. That's the belief that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
I am going to try to get to how you came to believe, not necessarily how you came to believe that God exists, but I'm going to determine your confidence level that it's true, that the belief is true, which you've said that and then we're going to talk about what builds that confidence. What are the things that make you confident that God actually exists? Okay. And I may interrupt you, and I don't want to be rude, but if there's something where I feel like maybe we can get back on track, I'm not trying to prove anything to you. I just really want to get to the root of what builds your confidence that God exists. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So you said God exists, and we don't have to define the God. That's fine.
No, I'll define it. I don't mind defining it all. Yeah.
If would you like to maybe give like a sentence or two? Like, is that enough to go into it, or?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you want me to try to be as slim and like to the point and precise with my answers?
Yeah.
You got it.
Well, no, not in general, just at least with this one, because I just want to understand. We know God exists. What God, I guess is what I should say.
The same God. You go ahead.
No, yeah, and it could be whether it's a Christian God, Muslim God, or pantheistic God, or I know that it's a little bit more complicated, so we can go forward without getting all of the nuance out. But yeah. I just want to know generally where you're coming from.
Okay, so when they asked Jesus where they could find God, he said, "Look under a rock and you will find my Father." That's God.
Okay, so it's the God of Jesus.
No.
Okay.
It's the God that Jesus knew.
The God that Jesus knew.
So that's the thing is the Abrahamic God is not the God Jesus worshiped.
Okay.
The God Jesus worshipped is this cup. It's you. It's me. It's when you look at your kid and you can see who you are in their eyes. It's love. It's connection. It's chaos. It's order. It's everything in the universe. It's synonymous and intrinsically intertwined with that.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that actually does help the conversation move forward. Now, how confident are you that God exists? Like on a scale of like 1 to 100, or like a percentage wise?
110.
110%. Got it. All right. What is the reason, or what got you to that confidence that God actually exists? What is like, and this may be your chance to kind of talk for a minute, give one or two reasons. If it's more than one or two things, feel free. And I may interrupt you just to keep the conversation going.
The Abrahamic religions, as they stand today, are evolutions of other religions. You're talking Gnosticism, you're talking Kabbalism, you're talking Islamic mysticism, which came before.
And I'm sorry, I know this is early to be stopping you. Is it, are the Abrahamic religions the reason why you believe God exists? Like,
No.
if you didn't have the Abrahamic religions, would you still believe God exists?
If we didn't have the modern Abrahamic religious interpretation, not like Abrahamic religion in general, but how we interpret it today, if we didn't have those interpretations, we'd know what God really was.
Okay, so
they're the block.
So here's the where street epistemology, and I'm not really interested in how we come. I guess what I'm trying to get to is, how did you find that God exists, or what gives you the confidence that God exists?
Yeah. So as I was saying, when you look past the modern interpretation of Abrahamic religions and you start to see things like, when I say Gnosticism, I'm not talking about knowledge. I'm talking about the actual Gnostic, like the religion, Gnosticism. There was a religion called Gnosticism, and it believed that the road to salvation was ignorance to enlightenment, not sin to salvation. And they believed that we were God incarnate, that God was in some ways relatable to the thing that creates all other things. Like, so the prima materia, which gives rise to the 4 fundamental forces of nature and the 17 subatomic particles, and that we are incarnate, the entire universe is an actual incarnation of God itself. And so when I started to study those things, Gnosticism says that, Buddhism at its core, because Buddhism's been modified a little bit, but at its core, Buddhism believes that, Kabbalism believes that. When I discovered that, alchemy believes that, Carl Jung believed that. When I discovered that, this and God became absolutely synonymous, because a massive conceptual shift occurred where I realized what God really means is everything. We are God. God. This is God. This whole experience is God, and there's no difference. There's no separate deity that is intelligent outside of the universe in itself. God is conscious because we are conscious. God, we are looking into the universe, so we're looking back at ourselves, which is also God.
Now, this is so interesting to me. I'm thinking about a person who has a similar belief that maybe the world is us and this is we and God. Okay, if somebody were to come to me and say, "Well, that's not God. That's actually we live in a simulation," and they use some of the same references that you did. So you said, like, there's no way to, it's just, it is. And so we're all here. And then they say, no, it's not God. It's actually a simulation. What would you say to a person who said that it was a simulation and not God?
I'd say, what's the difference?
Are you saying then that God is a simulation, or that God is a computer?
I'm saying that a simulation is a human word that we try to use to create the best analogy for us to understand what's happening here. Dream fits just as well as simulation. So dream is a more psychological linguistic interpretation or analogy. Simulation is a more modern tech interpretation of how to create that analogy and that similarity. Because honestly, I think when we create VR, we re-emulate the creation of the universe, which is exactly what's happening in VR. We're literally building out a universe we're going to be able to play inside of. And so it's almost as if it fractals downward, and we're just recreating and creating another layer of reality that we will jump into. So we use words like simulation, not because it's an actual simulation and there's a desktop that we're all inside of, but that's a really appropriate analogy so that we can have the discussion about it, because God, the real God, like in and of itself, is a word or an idea we can't describe fully.
I'm not super interested in like the analogy. I'm saying, let's say I'm talking to a person who believes 110% that we are in a simulation.
Okay.
And they've given me some of the same examples that you did. And they said, this is what got me to a confidence of 110% that we live in a simulation. How would you show that, or would you say that Jesus was talking about, the God that Jesus knew, that the God that Jesus knew was actually that we're in a simulation, and that person said, yeah, Jesus knew we were in a simulation. Are you saying that you both believe the same thing?
So if Jesus knew that we were in a simulation 2,000 years ago, he wouldn't have called it a simulation. But the simulation is just the word we use to try to articulate this idea of a holographic projected universe. It's not a simulation in the same way when we run a simulation on a computer, but it has so many similarities that we use that word in order to try to articulate the concept. He wouldn't have called it a simulation back then because there was no computers back then. But we use the word simulation now because we have this jargon to use, which helps us basically root it in a language that's accessible to most people on the planet. Do you understand?
Not fully. No, actually. What I'm saying is this is a person who has a completely different belief. Let's say that somebody else didn't claim that Jesus knew. Let's say they said like Muhammad knew, or
Elon Musk. How about we'll say Elon Musk because he actually said that and almost believes it, right?
Well, and I'm trying to stick with similar analogies to what you're using, or similar like historical characters, or historical figures. They are coming to a different conclusion than you, and they're using the same examples or the same reasoning. If they're using a different example, or if they're using different, or if they're coming to a different conclusion using the same reasoning, how are you? Is 100% an honest place to be on that scale of confidence? Because these are people who have the complete different conclusion using similar things. And what I'm hearing you do, are you saying that everybody believes in the same thing? Yeah.
So God is a noun. And simulation is more like we're talking about the application, right? So imagine simulation as, like I said, again, we're not saying it's a literal simulation the same way we run inside one of our PCs. We're using a type of a language that we all understand to articulate something that has like the same kind of similarity. So the universe, let's say we're on these lines. The universe is being holographically projected into the universe through black holes, let's say, is basically the theory I posited the other night.
So I do want to freeze. I want to continue getting into what gives you confidence that God actually exists. Are you, even if we go all the way back, so the God that Jesus knew, okay, are you saying that God exists? And then what would you mean, like, exists in what way? Because what I'm concerned with is, or the belief that I think we're talking about is a God that, I don't know if you would agree with this, but like takes up space and time, or has some kind of impact on the way that you live your life. Like besides that he is everything and that everything is him, is there like because I could say God is the extra belief. And I'm kind of departing SE a little bit here, but I'm saying if God is the extra belief, I can believe that without God, everything is here. So in what way does God actually exist?
So when you say the universe, how would you describe all of reality, all the everything in existence in entirety? What word would you use?
Describing all of reality?
Everything. Like if you were to describe all of reality, all of existence, what word would you use? Universe, reality, like what word would you use if you were to say, like, talk about everything that is?
If I'm talking about things that exist, I'm generally talking about things that take up space, time, and mass.
What do all of those things fit inside of? The universe? Would you say the universe?
Hey, you guys, can I jump in real quick?
Absolutely.
So real quick, Mark, if you don't mind, Ben, now that you are an official part of the TART team and the roster, I want you to be able to jump back into this in a minute. But we had a special guest that wanted to jump in and have this conversation, and I know Mike.
Is it Sam Harris?
It might be on a time constraint, so I just want to make sure we're respectful. And since Ben's part of the team, Ben, we can come back around and
Okay.
dive back into this. But I definitely want to bring on the man.
Thank you for talking with me, Mark.
Same back to you, man.
Yep, and we'll get you back on, Ben.
Okay.
But Mr. Teep Jump is in the building, and so I let Tom know a little bit of what was going on as far as the belief system and everything, and you guys can have a little chat and get to know kind of the premise, Mark, on your belief system. But second coming of Christ, eighth incarnation of Buddha, and the rest goes on. I'll let you go down the list, but he said he was interested in jumping on, having that conversation. But so I will. I'll shut up and let you guys chop it up.
Hey, how's it going? Can you guys hear me?
How you doing, man?
Pretty good. So, is there anything other than matter and energy in the universe?
Well, so there's space, right, which matter exists, and matter and energy exist inside of.
Space is a kind of matter and energy. Space-time is a kind. So, do you think there's anything other than just physical stuff, matter, energy, and motion, space-time?
Well, it depends on how you're interpreting that. For instance, the human being's five senses only can see 0.2% of the universe. And so there's like 99.8% of the universe we can't even perceive. And then our
matter and energy. So is there anything other than matter and energy?
Well, for instance, scientists are hypothesizing that antimatter exists.
Also a
who
kind
knows?
of matter.
Huh?
That's also a kind of matter. But
it's also distinctly different. So, well, let's slow down the conversation.
No, matter is just the stuff that exists as a part of energy, as a fraction of energy. So antimatter and matter are both forms of energy. So I'm asking.
Hang on 1 second. So short answer is, I don't know how all functions of the universe are. I don't know all the things that are in the universe. I only know what I've been told by physicists.
Right. I'm not asking you to know everything. I'm just asking what your position is. Is your position that there is anything other than just matter and energy as described in physics?
I think there's probably other stuff we haven't discovered yet.
But it's not like your position that God is this other stuff. It's just...
I don't see a distinction between matter and energy and God.
Okay, so you're not asserting that anything exists beyond physics. You're just saying you accept physics and you just call that God.
No, I mean, there's more to it than just physics. There's a lot of different ways to analyze it.
All right, so I understand everything in the universe to be describable by physics, just matter and energy and motion. So that is everything. And so if everything is God, then that would be God.
Well, for instance, there's Newtonian physics. And before, and at the time Newton was discovering Newtonian physics and building it out, and we were building our worldview based on that. We didn't have relative physics,
relativity,
which flipped the world on its head. And then, as we got weirder with that, there wasn't quantum physics, and that came, and that flipped everything on its head. Knowledge is constantly transforming and growing. We can never say definitively what the universe is and all characteristics and qualities and aspects as far as matter, energy, and all those things. Right, we know of, for instance, we know of 4 fundamental forces, and then we know of 17 subatomic particles, but there's also, they're theorizing there's an 18th one. So we don't know everything that's in the universe.
Right. I never said we knew everything, so I don't know why you're bringing that up. So my question is, do you think there's anything, do you have any evidence or any position that is asserting there is more than what we know via science?
When you say more what we know, I feel like you have to be a little more precise with what you're asking me. Are you asking me about God or asking me about what physicists may discover in the future?
No, I'm asking you, do you believe in anything that is outside of what is supported by science? Like UFOs, ghosts, anything outside of what is supported by science.
I guess I'd have to think about it. I'm pretty agnostic unless we've been able to nail it down.
That's fair enough. So when you're talking about God, you're only talking about, as far as we know of, just the stuff supported by science. You're just calling that God, plus whatever else happens to be out there.
Well, not just supported by science in the modern interpretation, like alchemy, for instance, the alchemical God. Would it be something we're supporting that science supports? Because one, it hasn't really dived into it, and and two, maybe a lot of it's not translatable to science. And that seems to be a lot of the issue when we have these conversations on here, is a lot of what I believe with this alchemical God doesn't seem translatable in the framework of this atheist empirical method of discovering and understanding.
Can you give me an example?
The 3-hour podcast we had last week.
That does not help me at all.
Like, well, for instance, these questions we're asking now don't make sense to me, because I already told you that I believe God is the culmination of all things in reality. Like, reality itself and God are intrinsically intertwined. There's no separation or distinction. So It doesn't exist outside of the realm of reality. But because science isn't complete and never will be, there are things about God that exist outside of what we discovered in science, because science is incomplete. The very conceptual understanding of God is that God is the complete all things that exist in reality.
I'm just trying to understand what you mean by God. So if you just mean by God all the stuff that exists that we know about through science, and you don't mean a non-physical mind that can cause things, then all you're doing is labeling the reality, the stuff we can discover, as God. And that's fine. There's not a problem.
Yeah, but I just told you that I didn't think God was just what we discovered in science. I think it's all things we've ever discovered in science.
Right. I agree with you.
Plus a bunch of things we haven't figured out yet.
That's fine by me. So if you're just limited to only accept the stuff that is discovered by science, and you're not positing something else and saying there is this other thing here that we know about, or that you know about, that science doesn't know about, then that's fine. You're just calling all this stuff we've discovered God, and that's okay.
Well, but it goes a bit deeper too, because when we understand this extra addition, and this is what we talked about last time, we put this extra layer of God inside of all these things, and talk about the consciousness of God. You see, God is conscious because we are conscious, and it's not trivial. It's not trivial. Like, well, that's the same thing as everything in science. Like, that's fine if that's what you guys want to call it, but I think it's also transcendent. I think it's also psychological, and to believe in God and to put yourself to the highest order and look up and humble yourself to something greater than yourself, and to have awe and reverence and gratitude for all that exists is actually important. It's not trivial. And to just look at the universe as something that is mute, something that doesn't speak to us, something that we're not interrelatedly and interconnected to. There's this thing amongst, this idea of the secular view or the atheistic view, that we are separate from all that is in nature, right? Like, we are examining nature almost externally from this point, this external perspective, when we ourselves are nature and interconnected and related to that. And I think part of what this belief in God is it does that for us. But there's that other philosophical layer too that's important, and that is to humble ourselves to this greater good, this greater idea. So there's these other layers that are important, but they're not important in the scientific, like when we take science, like biology, physics. It's important in a philosophical and psychological way. Like, those things are important. God is so many more things than just the measurable, perceivable universe, which can go into a microscope or be looked through in a telescope.
So the only difference between your worldview and science is that you like to worship nature. Is that right?
Well, not my only thing. I think
what else is there?
There's a lot of things. I don't know. What are you trying to get at?
Well, it seems like you're just an everyday atheist, except you worship nature. That there's no difference between you and anybody else on the show.
Well, no, because I'm not obsessing over whether or not God exists.
I don't think anyone on the show does either. We obsess over arguments and debates and stuff. So, but what would be your other differences between science and your position?
I don't know. I mean, I said I did it for 3 hours. I had this conversation. Were you there or no?
No, I was not there.
So, like, ask me a specific question. Like, you're asking these very broad questions. Like, just talk to me like you're trying to have a conversation with me.
That is
like we're just going back and forth, and we're having fun talking about our beliefs. The way. Let me explain to you. The way you're asking the questions is like very like I'm sitting inside of an interrogation room, man. Like, just talk to me. Just take a deep breath and just like ask me questions. Because right now it just feels like you're just trying to nail me to a cross. Ironically enough. So just like what made me come to this? What kind of feelings do I have about it? Like, describe like I told you, God is everything. God is everything to me. It's human beings. It's the cup. It's all these different things. So I don't know what I feel like I've answered that. Like, I feel like I've answered it 100 times. I believe God is all things that exist in the universe. And some of those things exist outside of the realm of science because science hasn't discovered all things in the universe yet.
Okay, so again, I'm just trying to understand what you mean by the word, or else I can't ask you any questions about what you believe or why you believe it until I understand what it is that you believe. So what is the difference between your position and just an average atheist, other than the fact that you like to worship nature?
Well, it depends on the atheist, because some atheists refute an Abrahamic God, but they consider the possibility of a pantheistic one, right? Some atheists just completely outright refuse the word. It's not like there's one kind of atheist either. Like, that's obvious. We have a lot of people on the show who have differing views. So, like, you've got to ask like a more direct question.
No, that's really direct. Just give me a single example, a single fact or proposition that you accept that an atheist would not accept.
Well, that I think that, for instance, there's more that we can do with our brains when we take the position that there is a God and that we can rise to a higher like understanding of our own brain and our own body, that we can actually affect material universe with our thoughts. That's
what do you mean by that? Like use the force and lift stuff kind of affect the universe?
Like when we meditate, we can up and down regulate our DNA and actually repair our telomeres.
Okay, that's an interesting one.
And reduce inflammation in our DNA because we start to connect with this more divine connection with the universe. And before you argue with me, go ahead and look it up. It's good research. You can meditate away inflammation.
That's fantastic. What exactly do you mean by inflammation of DNA?
No, inflammation in the body. So when you meditate, you can actually up and down, right? So the way the double helix works.
I know what meditation does. I know how it affects stress. I know how it reduces cortisol and increases serotonin, which can increase the metabolism and your immune system. So I know how it works. I know how meditation can affect your body. It can't do anything with your DNA though. That it cannot do.
No, it can. It turns on and off codons. The DNA operates like a bunch of 0-1 switches. And when you meditate, you can do what's called up and down. You regulate gene codons on the DNA. There's changes occurring there.
Okay, so DNA is not like switches. It doesn't switch anything on.
Hold on, I'm gonna look it up.
It's a code. So it's just there's ATCG. Those are
Give me a second,
languages. Bro. It doesn't switch anything, and it creates proteins. Proteins read it and then produce more proteins. So meditation does not affect DNA.
Hang on 1 second, bud.
Go for it.
Yeah, and so these different chemical catalysts essentially change the way the DNA expresses itself in your body.
Change the way the DNA expresses. How exactly does it do that?
I don't know exactly. I'm not a chemist. I'm telling you about research. You asked me things that I believe that are outside the realm of science, and now you're asking me for science to prove it.
Oh no, that was a great answer. That you did answer my question. I asked, what do you disagree with science? And that
not disagree. You asked me, is there anything that I believe that science doesn't believe or hasn't gotten to yet? And then I told you something, and then you told me, well, science doesn't prove that. Exactly.
Right. So
you just asked me.
Right. So you answered my question perfectly.
You're putting me into a circular argument. I can't.
No.
I have to be wrong on.
No.
Literally, just hang on. You literally just hang on. You literally just asked me to tell you something that science doesn't support, and then asked me to use science to support it.
No, that's not what I meant.
Yeah, you did.
So you did answer my first question exactly how I wanted you to. I asked you, what is the difference between your position in science and meditation can affect DNA? You're right. That is a complete difference. Thank you for answering my question. Now I'm going to go to a different question, which is totally unrelated. Why do you think meditation can affect DNA?
Because I think our minds are actually input-output devices, and the earth is more like a realm that can change based on our thoughts, which is also not provable with science. I think that we actually can change the material universe at the quantum level with our brains. We just forgot how to do it. and that calling ourselves God and understanding God exists in the universe will unlock a power that will explain how Moses parted the Red Sea. And I know we get off on a really weird, I can't prove that with science, but I believe that I am trying to pioneer the way the mind works in our reality, the same way that guy that ran the 4-minute mile was trying to pioneer the ability for people to run faster. I'm trying to get people to think better or think bigger. And I think there's way more to this reality that we don't understand, and that we can actually manipulate reality. And Jesus actually turned water to wine. And of course, I can't prove any of those things.
Okay, so my question is, since it can't be proven by science, you must have used some other method to come to this belief. How did you come to the belief that this is a true thing if you didn't use science?
So who is that guy that looked out at the universe, and before we realized that stars were just stars were suns like ours, he looked out and he's like, my God, those things are suns. I don't know what his name was, but there was a person that discovered that. And then, he eventually died carrying that belief and trying to tell people about it. The answer to my question or the question you asked me, is the same as him. He didn't use science because it was beyond the science that was currently there. He had a gut feeling. He had probably related different sciences together and drawn a new conclusion. And that's how we use the scientific method to understand new things. I use different texts. I put them together and say, you know what? This might be the next step. And then I try to jump into unknown area and see if we can test it. This is the way anything gets discovered, is by the person sticking their neck out and saying, I believe something kind of strange and crazy. How do we test this?
Yes, that's called a hypothesis. Every scientist starts by using their imagination to come up with an idea, and it's completely unsupported by anything other than their imagination, and then they try to make testable predictions to demonstrate it.
Yeah.
So the reason you came to this is just because you imagine it. Is that what you're saying? It's a hypothesis, but you don't have any support for it yet?
Came to what? That the one I just said about the mind creating reality?
Editing the DNA stuff?
Well, the DNA stuff is because there's a lot of information that you can meditate, like I said, meditate and change the way your genes express themselves in your body, right? And so from there, I'm like, well, and I also did some other reading where it's like every experience that happens to you in your life gets written on your DNA, right? Like in one way, shape, or form, your DNA takes on the experiences you have throughout your life. That's, for instance, they say how alcoholism runs through the family, how it becomes a hereditary disease is someone's experience with alcoholism in their own life builds patterns in the DNA, which is the thing that passes on to the child. And now they're more susceptible to alcoholism, right? So
no, that's not quite how it works.
But I'm playing with those ideas because they're starting to make sense, because I draw from a couple different places. And I say, what if the generational curses from the Bible were just actually talking about genes and DNA being affected during your lifetime based on the actions and behaviors you make, and then it getting passed down to your children? What if those two things are the same thing, for instance, right? This is the kind of stuff that I'm doing.
Okay, so the science I know of says that essentially nothing you do affects your DNA unless it causes a mutation or is a kind of radiation. Your actions don't affect your DNA at all. Your brain states don't affect your DNA. The science says that does not happen. So I don't know what you mean when you say that there is evidence of this occurring, because it's not in science. So, what you're saying is you have read all of the literature on DNA and how it works. I have read the consensus on the field who have read all the literature and know how DNA works.
So you've talked about everything, and you already asked all these exact questions that you're asking me now. You are completely confident you know everything about how DNA works currently in all the literature and science, is what you're telling me right now.
I know the consensus of how DNA works, so I know how the experts in the
field
see it.
Describe consensus to me.
The vast majority of the people who've done all of the work in the field.
No, describe the consensus that they came to.
Oh, the consensus that brain states and actions do not affect DNA in any way.
Could you cite some research for me real quick?
Sure, I could. Does meditation affect DNA? Meditation does not impact the results of DNA tests. Nope.
So you looked at one search on Google, and now that's your answer? No. Like, you're not going to dig into it. You're not going to use JSTOR. You're not going to use like a bunch. You're not going to take some time with this. You're just going to jump to that conclusion. That's not how science works, man.
Yeah, I'm just reading the science. These are all scientific journals I'm reading from. I just went to the Google Scholar.
Like, how many did you just read?
I'm just reading the titles of them.
Okay, well, that doesn't
I don't
really tell
actually
you
need
much
to
about
read
anything, does it?
any of them because
You don't
I
actually read any research on DNA, but you're telling me you know all
No,
about it.
I've already read the research on DNA. I know what the consensus result is, and the consensus result is that you're wrong. So, I mean, if you want to prove me wrong on that, go for it. I mean, I'm happy to take the burden of proof, and if you can show that there's actually,
Well, I think
I'm
it's a
wrong
waste of
about the
time to
consensus,
try to like
feel free.
research a bunch right now, but I'd love to go
That's
back on
fine.
and find some stuff on it. Like at the
That's
end of the
cool.
day, okay, I'm not embarrassed about admitting that I'm wrong right now. I read something that said when you meditate, it can change the way your DNA expresses itself.
That's
I'll
fair.
go look for that article again. It's not a huge deal though if I'm wrong or if I'm right.
That's fair.
This started as a conversation where you asked me if I believed anything about God that existed outside of the scientific literature. And now you're using scientific literature to try to tell me I'm wrong.
Well, you said you read something, and so
And
I was
I
interested.
did. And I did read something, and I'll be glad to go look for it. But I think it's a terrible
That's
time
fine.
to do this right now.
That's
I
fine.
think we can be having a way better conversation right now. What do you
That's fine.
what is your goal right now?
Well, I was
Like-
looking for a reason to accept what you're saying is true or not. Because
No, you weren't. You were looking for a way to prove. If you were looking for a reason, you'd be talking to me like Pasta Mike. You'd be asking you'd be asking like detailed questions. They would be articulated well. You wouldn't be fast shooting fast firing questions at me. You'd just be having a conversation with me. You're holding a position on the other side.
Questions.
All right.
So yeah, the way I assess the truth or falsity of any belief from anyone, including myself, is I try to destroy it as much as possible. And if I can't, then that's good evidence it's true. So that's how science works. How science works is you take an idea from every scientist, and every other scientist tries to beat the crap out of it to show it's false. And if they can't, then they have to admit the other scientist was right. So
yeah, but what is it that you're beating the crap out of? I already told you. I think God and this cup and me and you are the same thing.
The idea that meditation can affect our DNA, that idea I'm going to beat the crap out of because I think it's not true.
All right. Well, and I'm going to go look at the article I read that said it. But beyond that, how long are we going to beat the dead horse? I could be wrong.
No, that's fine.
I'm admitting right now. I'll even say I'm wrong. I don't know.
That's perfectly reasonable. That's perfectly reasonable response. Say here's the resource I use to come to that conclusion, and you can look at it later. That's perfectly fine. Just send me that later. That's fine. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
So is there any other beliefs you have that would not agree with science or any normal atheist?
Why don't you just ask me a specific question?
How is that not a specific question?
Is there any beliefs? Ask me something specific, like a historical question, or the intent of God, why it's important to believe.
Intent. God has an intent.
Specific question.
What do you mean by God has an intent?
No, I'm giving you a sample question you could ask.
Well, I don't see any difference between your view and naturalism other than that one thing you listed. So anything I'd ask you would just be the same thing I'd ask anyone else on the show. And which is, I pretty much agree with you on everything. So I have nothing to ask you. So my questions of where there's a difference is because that's where the interesting questions would be, is if there's a
and I told you,
between...
it's the psychological and philosophical layers of God. We went over this in the podcast last time. We all agreed that I'm basically a naturalist who believes that there's psychological and philosophical advantages to entering a divine spark or God into the rest of your naturalistic worldview. That's the only difference. That's what we agreed with last time. I don't disagree with that.
So why do you think that believing in the divine spark gives you some kind of more cognitive abilities?
Well, because then we place ourselves in the position of being a creator and being more than just human beings. Like we set the bar higher for ourselves as individual conscious beings in the universe, instead of just seeing the universe as something mute that doesn't communicate back with us. We don't understand the full extent of consciousness, but if we don't explore the ideas and possibly even accept the ideas that there's a grander consciousness that makes up this whole thing, we'll never be able to explore the possibilities of any advantages of that position. And I feel like there's a lot more advantages to believing in God than there is not believing it. That extra layer it's so dense and complex. And honestly, if you just like explore my belief system, there's a lot of cool things we can talk about on this. Right,
you give me an example because you say there's other things that this belief adds. Like,
well, I just gave you one.
What?
This idea of exploring a greater consciousness in the universe and actually thinking about that and connecting with that idea can open up all these new doorways. Like
give me one of the doorways. That's what I'm looking for. What is one of the doorways that it can open up?
Well, have you heard of lucid dreaming and astral projection?
Yes, I believe in lucid dreaming for sure, not astral projection, and I do that without a God.
So what I mean is, with astral projection and this idea of being able to connect with a deeper consciousness in the universe, well, that would require a belief in God, right?
No.
A consciousness, a greater consciousness. For
No.
me, it's my God that is that greater consciousness. So it's that belief in God that there's some deeper consciousness that I can communicate with, right? That allows me
that could be your belief,
consider these ideas of astral projection and being able to actually take information from the universe and download it into myself through that practice and behavior. So that requires, for me, it requires a spiritual belief.
So it requires that for you, but it doesn't require it for many people. Like many people believe in astral projection and no God or no greater consciousness. It's just a feature of the universe. So you're not required to believe in a God to have that. So it doesn't seem like that's a new door. That
If I go into a projection and believe that I'm speaking to God, it does.
What's the difference?
That there's a larger consciousness. At the end of the day, we talked about this for 3 hours before. I'm using a different word for the same thing, but this idea.
No. You keep saying that there's this new ability we unlock by believing there is a God, and you said the new ability is we can think about astral projection.
No, you asked me to give you one example of a bunch. Like I could go on more. Like
one is good. Just stick with one at a time. So we can believe in astral projection without God. So that doesn't seem to be it. But you're saying you have astral projection.
No. Like I'm talking about like actually connecting with the God that I believe in, which is the greater consciousness of all universe. I believe that's God. So when I astral project and I connect with that, I believe that I'm speaking to my God. That's my belief. So it's intrinsically tied to my belief in God.
So you have to believe in a God to believe that you can astral project and talk to a God. Like, okay, but what difference does that make? Like, what is the added ability we have in the world that gives us?
Well, there's another thing that it gives us is like when we believe in God, this idea of a higher power, that it's worth something. It gives us a motivation to be righteous. It gives us a motivation to look up and connect with something deeper than ourselves. It lets us look out at nature and be in awe and reverence for something that was created with intent.
And why do
To me, there's a lot of philosophical and psychological value with connecting with something bigger than yourself.
Okay, but why do you think you can't do that without a God? Because as far as I know, lots of people do that without a God.
Something bigger than themselves,
Absolutely.
like what? Like the universe itself?
Like the universe, like nature,
yeah,
like the ether, all kinds of things.
Call it universe, and I can call it God.
Well, okay. So, but you said you had to believe in a God. Like atheists do this without a God. So they can connect with the universe and believe there's a universe, connect with deeper things.
Like me and Sam Harris are basically the same. I just call it God. I mean, that's another thing is I don't get why people get so like tied up about it. It's just a word.
Well, you said there's some difference between belief in a God.
There's I think philosophical and psychological layers to it. That if there is deity, if there's purpose, and there's a reason to do good in the world, I can do all the things atheists do for that. Plus, I have another layer on top of that. Remember, this is an interpretation of words. So you can call it the universe, and I'll call it God.
I'm fine. I don't care which words you use. I want to know what the difference is. You say there's a difference between you and atheists, and I want to know what the difference is because all the things you listed, atheists believe in and do just fine without any reference to a God.
Well, there isn't much differences, and like I said, for 3 hours we kind of really came to that conclusion. It's like this 1% where I call it God, and I think that calling it God has purpose because it adds this layer of like reverence and beauty for me.
Maybe why can't you have reference?
I didn't say you couldn't. I didn't say you couldn't.
Okay.
I never said you couldn't.
Okay.
I never said anybody couldn't. I'm using the word God, and that's the word I like to use.
Well, I thought you said it added a deeper level of meaning.
It does for me.
For you.
The pursuit of God is a personal experience. I'm not trying to shove this down anybody's throat either. This is what I feel, what I believe. I call it God. You can call it the universe, or and Murder Shed Steve can call it Shabuba. Like I'm not sitting here saying that it's so like we have so many differences. Last episode I said we're like 99% agreeing on the same thing. I just use a different word, and I think that there's some philosophical and psychological value to seeing God as this intrinsic thing that's in all of us and seeing the divine in the next person. I think it's incredibly important. When I look at someone, I don't just see a human being. I see God itself. I see all of creation. I see the creator. I see intent to manifest beauty in the universe. Those things are important to me. And the word God helps me articulate that and feel that energy.
Okay, I'm fine with all of that. You can feel whatever you want to feel. But you're not saying there is any difference between like this new added ability, or there's no deeper meaning that you can't gain without a god. There's nothing that you need to call it a god to do.
What?
Like you kept saying that there's a difference in that it unlocks new abilities for calling it a god rather than just not believing.
But I outlined those things. I think that we can do way more with our brains, or actual brains, and I think we can disrupt and manipulate matter and energy with our minds when we jump into this position of not just being human, being able to transcend that with what I call the power of God.
Yeah, that would be really cool if you could demonstrate that. I would definitely consider that to be.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Sure. So, but my question was, okay, other than that, because we already went over that, is there anything else that calling it God gets you that you can't get without calling it God?
Like, are you trying to convert me? Right? I don't know.
No, I don't care what you believe. It doesn't make a difference to me what you believe. I'm trying to understand.
Like I said,
what you think
said
the
before on the
difference
last podcast, 99% of the stuff we agree on. I just basically told you.
Yeah, no. I want to know about the 1%. Is the 1% only
I just
the
told
difference
you
in
like
words?
10 things. That's not enough for you to fill the 1%.
10 things. I know 2 things. One is that you use the word God, and 2 is that you think you can manipulate matter with thoughts.
And I think that there's a philosophical value to it that gives me reverence and awe and excitement. And I see God in somebody else, and I see what's a divine spark, that there's an intent for consciousness, and that we're going somewhere with this, and it's important. Like that.
Okay, but is that just for you and your feelings, or would that apply to other people, or are they better off?
It depends on if it works for them. I don't know.
Okay.
It depends on the person. I mean, there's a lot of people that it does work for. There's a few people on my TikTok that enjoy it and that like that idea and like to empower themselves as a little G God in a big G world. It's just a layer. Like, I don't know. Like I don't understand what it is you want to understand, or what are you getting at?
Again, I'm just trying to understand what exactly you mean by these terms. So if you're only doing it because it makes you feel better, that's fine by me. I don't have any problem with that. The only thing in your worldview that I seem to not agree with would be the fact that you think thoughts can affect matter. I still don't know what you mean by the philosophical and purposeful meaning in using the word. I mean, that seems like you can get that from anything depending on the person you are. It doesn't seem like.
Well, it depends on how you build the word out. It depends on how you build the concept out. I'm just using the word.
Well, that
God.
seems to be subjective. It seems to be that depending on the type of person you are.
It is subjective, because you can call it Allah, you can call it universe, you can call it Shabbat, you call it anything you want. It's a complex concept idea for me, where I've hyperlinked all the things that are important to me to this word.
Right. So that it wouldn't actually be a difference.
Huh?
That wouldn't be a difference. That would just be like you use this word and they use this word to get the same emotional response.
And we, like I said, for 3 hours we all agreed on that already. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm the one. It was Murder Shed Steve and me who pioneered that and said, yeah, exactly. Snapped their fingers, pointed at each other. There's no disagreement there.
Okay, cool. So yeah, it seems like the only thing I disagree with your worldview on is that your mind can affect matter.
Yeah, that's the one I'm working on.
Cool.
I'm pioneering a science.
I look forward to seeing it published.
Hey, welcome. Well, first, Mark, as always, thanks, man, and great dialogue. And Mark always comes on, has a great attitude, and always willing to have a great conversation. We appreciate that. So again, Mark, thank you so much for being part of the roundtable again this evening. And T Jump, the first time on the Atheist roundtable and showing up. Thank you, man. Appreciate it, and we all. Appreciate what you do for the community and what you bring with your channel and the debates and everything. So you are much valued here, brother. Thanks for coming on. Anything you want to say?
Was that different from your channel's usual content?
Depends on what you mean. Like he's not Darth Dawkins, so that's improvement.
Solid point.
So yeah, thanks for inviting me on, guys. It was a lot of fun. I'm gonna get some dinner. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, man. Have a good one. Rest up.
Thanks, Jump. Appreciate it. And for those who don't know who T Jump is, go check him out. He's got a platform here and on YouTube, and he's battled, as he just said, the infamous Darth Dawkins, which is a endless battle on YouTube. But he's a good dude, and I love hearing him.
Sit down, sir. I'm not talking about certainty, okay?
Sir, don't overtalk me. They have a ton of fun, but we put it out there for questions to come in here and get the Q&A going for Mark. If you got questions for Mark or for Jesus Mike or myself, definitely let us know. We're gonna kick in and have some fun. And thank you everybody so far that's been in the comment section. There's been tons of comments, tons of conversations going on.
Can I interject, by the way? There's someone in the comment sections that made a prophecy. Like it was Thales of Miletus. I'm sorry if I'm messing your name up. He literally at the beginning of the show goes, "Tart, you guys should get T-Jump on the show." And then he popped in. I was like, "What?" And then I just see him now pop through the thing, and I'm just like, "Hold on, I'm gonna need a backstory here." But anyway, we'll get into that after the show. But no, that was cool. That was a surprise to me and other people. So I don't know what Austin.
It was a surprise to me too.
Yeah, so, I mean, me as well. So
me too.
They were tough questions. They were really tough questions, and you put me on the line. And I guess, but I still think that it brings me this layer of like searching for something more amazing and majestic in the universe. I guess, I don't know. It just seems like a nice psychological, philosophical layer to help me like understand the world in a deeper way. And it pushes me to demand more of myself than just what we expect is humanly possible, so to speak.
Sure. I think the dilemma there a lot was hung up on maybe some linguistics and some words, and then where I share value in the same sense is kind of where you're deriving those, what future predictions can you do? But that, me and you, Mark, me and you could talk about that forever.
That was about to say there will be further episodes. We can continue that dialogue. But that being said, here is the man, Murder Shed Steve.
So it's time for Q&A with Murder Shed Steve.
Wait. Can you provide evidence that a God exists?
Well, how's it going, guys? Anybody there? Oh, hey, Oz.
I'm here now.
Hey, God, buddy.
What's going on? It was better before we got to this segment.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm not sure what we just witnessed, but
you know what I'm doing, guys? I'm crafting a new pipe, and I'm cutting down the wood to make the bowl. So just
that's fair enough for me, Steve. I think you're a great guy. Just want to throw that out there.
Thanks,
you're doing a good job for TART, and just want to point out that I want to live for the next 30 or 40 years, maybe 50 years, something like that. Just throwing that out there at you. Good, we're good friends. All right, see you, buddy.
I appreciate that, and I wish well that you do make it another 30 years.
Yeah.
So I suppose we should get right into the Q&A, right?
Yes, sir.
I've got a question right away from a little bit further back from Anthony here, and I'm not sure if it's his question or because it's in quotation marks, but is the coffee cup also conscious like humans and God? I suppose his question is consciousness universal to everything?
No, he was in reference to something that Mark had said earlier about the coffee cup.
Yeah.
So one, it's an honor. Your reputation precedes you, Anthony. So this is really with the alchemical application. So human beings, we call ourselves conscious, right? But it's not just we're conscious. There's layers to that, right? We're conscious of ourselves. We can perceive the past and the future. We can consider these higher concepts that other animals can't. When you look at an elephant has some grip on past and present, or at past and present, maybe not future, because it holds the bones of its loved ones for periods of time. Scientists have speculated that might be because it can kind of consider the past. Orca whales are now becoming tribal. They're actually kind of building out something that's like a pseudo culture. So there's these layers of consciousness. When we kick back, it's a spectrum. And so maybe the coffee cup is conscious on some level, but we all know that there's this, the plants manifest themselves out of, minerals. They grow out of the minerals. We start with like small, different like small compounds that came together and eventually built up cells and all that. And so the process is interconnected and interrelated all the way through. And so if we were to say, is the coffee cup conscious? I mean, it can't run calculus, but maybe at some level it is conscious. Do I know how? No, but I think that consciousness is a little more spread out than just human beings and just elephants and just orca whales. I think it spreads out quite a bit more, and it's just layers. Are ants conscious? Like, to an extent, maybe. Like, we have to, I guess, maybe broaden our understanding of what consciousness is.
Okay.
I've got another question from John Anthony here, which I feel like you've addressed, but maybe you can try and say it in a different way. How can someone have a naturalistic worldview that includes something that isn't natural?
So what's the thing that's not natural? This idea of God?
I would believe so, yes. Basically being a theist and also being naturalist.
Well, so remember, my concept of God is all things that are. And so that's essentially naturalistic in definition, right? Or correct me if I'm wrong.
I would say so.
So like there really is no distinction for me. I'm not like putting something in the universe that wasn't already there. I see the whole universe itself as God. Like that's the word I use.
And I do, and we've already kind of been over that a few times, and I figured I'd just give you another opportunity to just say it in a different way. So I got another question here from Velocilobster. How do you know, or why do you believe that the universe was created with intent?
Well, I don't know that the universe was created with intent. What I was saying before, with the guy that was just on here, is that it's nice to start considering that idea that there's a purpose and a reason for us to be here, because without that, we can fall into nihilism. And I think nihilism is an extremely dangerous ideology to believe in. And so to pursue the potential reality that there is some intention here, that there is some beautiful purpose, and that all this is unfolding into something important, I think it is like, I don't see that there's any negative aspect or negative effects of that. I only see positive things, like adding that maybe there's some intent and purpose, and that this is a beautiful story that's being told, and we're a part of it.
And I've got one more question here from Echo Smith. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. Mark, what is happening when an adult is in an accident and is jarred violently, survive, but have the mentality of a 5-year-old? They can still walk and talk, but their conscience has changed.
What is happening in what interpretation? Like
so essentially, when somebody has a severe brain injury or trauma to the brain and their personality completely changes due to that trauma, is that indicative of the consciousness being separate from the physical being, or how would it work without it, essentially being purely physical or naturalistic? I think that's what they're trying to get at with the question.
Well, consciousness is a word we use to describe this idea of consciousness. So their consciousness has changed, but what's happening beyond that? I don't know if there is anything that happens beyond the fact that their brain has been physically affected, and then the consciousness has changed, or their cognitive abilities have changed. That's what happened. I wouldn't perceive it any differently in the context of what I believe in. They got into an accident and they hurt their head, and now they think differently.
So you would submit, I guess, that the and correct me if I'm wrong, that consciousness is, controlled or created by the physical brain.
Well,
it's not separate from the physical.
Well, like, is our consciousness separate from the rest of reality, or is what you're saying? Or
I suppose in a sense it would have to be, because it's
Well,
part of our
I
physical
believe
brain.
I think we're all Wi-Fi connected to each other. Like, I think that
Okay.
consciousness is bigger than us. We have individual consciousness, which we identify as our own, like, that's our ego. That's just a wall that we've built that creates this personal identity. But that consciousness in general is like across all things, and it's manifesting itself in different ways. Human beings are one way that consciousness manifests itself, but that this personal identity, this individuated consciousness that's separate from the rest of reality, that's just an illusion of ego.
So you'd essentially consider us like on a computer network with each other, but we are individual computers on this network.
That's one good analogy to
Right.
use. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from, or your position on that,
Yeah.
where consciousness exists, or So with that kind of ether of consciousness, right? Is it something that anybody could tap into individually?
Like to the higher consciousness.
Sure, if that's what you want to call it.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point I was trying to make to Tom. Is it right? Tom Jump. Am I saying that right? So that's the point I was trying to make to Tom, is that, like, that's one of the things, that's one of the layers that is added on to this naturalistic view, is that I do believe that there is this interconnected, interrelated higher consciousness that we can tap into, and that we can traverse time and space in our minds, and because we're networked to everything else in the universe. Yeah, I believe that.
So can we demonstrate, or are you able to demonstrate that you can tap into it, or are we able to demonstrate that it exists?
Well, in my
like,
own life, I've had, you go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, like, what would be the process for tapping into that?
Well, a test we could do, for instance, is, let's say someone got really good at what they think is astral projection, and somebody else did it too, and they both told themselves, okay, I'm going to meet you in your dream, and I'm going to have a special code word. I'm going to tell you that word. When you get up in the morning, you're going to tell me that word that I told you. So that'd be a way we'd test it, for instance. Now, I can give you a couple anecdotal stories from my own life really quick, if that would, to show you what happened in my own life, how it works.
I don't think that would be sufficient.
I mean, be sufficient, but if you wanted me to tell you the story,
we can.
Steve, is there do we have any more questions from the viewers? If not, we need to keep it. We're at an hour and a half. We got to keep moving.
Nope. Nope. We're good to go. Those questions were my selfish little questions there. So I appreciate you answering them, Mark. I just felt like we needed to explore that a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we're all cool with Mark. Mark will be back, but we'll wrap up with the Q&A right.
So it's time for Q&A with Murder Shed Steve.
Psych. We already did that. I did it on purpose. But before we end, we always end our episodes with final thoughts with Jesus Christos, and we'll do that tonight. But first of all, as always, and I said, Mark, thank you for coming on. You're always great, man. You're a great guest, and I love that. No matter what questions asked, you're always cool, and all of us can always go back and forth, and you're the epitome of a great guest, and I want you to know that. I think it's awesome. You're a rock star in my book, and I'm gonna keep talking all that Stone Cold Steve Austin shit.
Of course,
you're hearing it. But some of you might have felt deceived tonight because Ben's face was on the cover for the YouTube and for Twitter and all that, and things kind of took a little bit of a curveball midday, early evening. But I want everybody to know officially right now that Ben is going to be an official member or part of the TART roster, so to speak, and will be joining us, and we're grateful.
I'm going to the Christian side. He's taking over.
Jesus actually got saved, and he's going by Mike now. No, but
yeah, we'll get into it on the final thoughts.
But Ben's going to add great. He's going to be a great asset to not just our platform, but the community as a whole, and what he brings. And I know I'm going to learn a ton from him. Just talking to him in the last few 3 or 4 weeks that we've been talking. Before we sign off, Ben, I know this took a little bigger twist than any of us anticipated tonight. First of all, man, welcome to the TART team and the TART roster, and we look forward to growing and learning from you, and you learning with us, and all that. Is there anything before we sign off? Anything that you would like to say?
Yeah, just thank you for having me here. Thank you, Mark, for talking. And Mark, I wanted to say welcome to, I mean, at this point, I want to say welcome to the team. And I want you to know that there's, no, I'm serious. There's a community out there that is ready for you to join them. And it's going to look probably different from what you might think in your head, but we're here for you. We appreciate you. And, I just want to make sure that you know that there's a place for you in like the secular community that feels just as deeply as you do about human emotion, about taking care of other people, and about feeling wonder about the universe. So all of those things, yeah. I'm with you 100% on almost everything. So I just want to make sure that you feel welcome here.
Excellent, and thank you.
Yep. Yeah, and then my plug is just the only thing that I have out there. I don't have SE videos that you're used to seeing. I practice it mostly in my day-to-day life with people I know and in my online communications. You can find me on TikTok at BenG Atheist, and that's where you can find me.
But
all hail Shabuba.
But Ben, you be tweeting though, don't you?
I do have a Twitter. It's also at BenG Atheist. As I began using TikTok, I kind of slumped on that, but I'll be using both. Absolutely.
Yep. So cool. No. Thank you guys, and yeah, Mark will be on, and Mark and Ben will be faces and the voices that you guys will get used to, and we welcome both of them. And again, T-Jump, thanks for coming on tonight, man. And we appreciate you popping in and having that conversation. And now it's time for
yes, sit back, unwind, because it's Final Thoughts with Jesus Mike.
Language is a rather peculiar thing. For one, you can essentially use it to describe anything within reality. And as a programming major, I use this with logic and C++ to express machine language. But I think the part that gets the most twisted is how it's advantageously used to further pure conjecture. And we could take the word magic, for example. And some people, they might define this as, maybe what science hasn't found yet. And I think for the lack of trying, it's just a prime example of how we can use linguistics so elastic and in such almost a rubber band type of fashion. You can stretch the lengths as far as you want with it. So when we talk magic, we typically get a specific pure story that what's being told. And I think that that's typically the idea that you can do something within your realm to change a substance or make yourself potentially defy the laws of physics or whatever it could be. There's a rigorous standard that's withheld when we talk about this. When we talk about something like allele or a gene or perhaps a geological strata, we know specifically what we talk about, and it seems weird that we can change these words so elastically with just whatever whim. And I don't want to put a sleight of hand or anything, but I think if you want to call me an agnostic or an atheist, you want to use that term, that's fine. The word doesn't matter, but a mutual understanding is absolutely vital to the Socratic method and a proper conversation with your interlocutor. And so with that said, try to define your words with the person, because even if maybe they use magic differently, or maybe they use God differently, instead of getting so focused on what that could potentially mean, just ask them what they mean. And with that, we love you guys. Take care.